Natural disasters are something that many of us have dealt with at some point in our lives, but luckily today we have technology that helps us predict when the next one's going to hit, unless you live in an area that gets hit by tornadoes or earthquakes, because they really don't care about your day. But unfortunately for the people of Pompeii in 79 CE, they didn't heed the signs that Mount Vesuvius was putting off, and they soon found themselves running for their lives. But we're going to get more into that in a little bit. And do you know how many times Mount Vesuvius has erupted? If you can answer in the comments, whoever's the closest or spot on will get their name put onto a GIF in the next video. Pompeii is located in the Campania region of Italy. The area Pompeii is in was constantly sought after for control by different groups, and the settlement that would eventually turn into Pompeii was founded by the Oscan-speaking people during the Neolithic. They started in southern and central Italy, and are one of the earliest languages in Italy. Their language was eventually replaced during the 1st century CE by Latin. What we know about their language today comes from writings that we have that were kind of like the Rosetta Stone. They were written in several different languages. This helped give an insight into who they were. They found their settlement near the Sarnus River, at the foot of Mount Vesuvius's very fertile grounds. But then in the 8th century BCE, the Greeks went and got involved, and the settlement became more Greekified. But it wasn't too long before people that were a little bit closer to home decided that they wanted the land. The Etruscans during the 7th century BCE decided that they wanted the land of Campania. The Etruscans were considered to be the first major civilization on the peninsula of Italy. They gave the Romans such things as their architecture, all the way down to some of the clothing that we associate the Romans with most today, the toga. The Etruscans would hold power in the area for quite a while. That wasn't until a naval battle with King Hiram I of Syracuse in 474 BCE. The Greeks immediately seized on this power vacuum, and they became an influence in the area once again. After the Greek influence, the next group of people that would turn their sights on the area were the Samites. They came from the hills and were known for liking war, maybe just a little bit too much. This eventually brought them to Campania, where they came in conflict with the Romans. There were a series of wars between the two groups, and they're easy to remember because the first war is literally called the First Samnite War. It was from 343 to 341 BCE, and at the end of this war, the Romans and the Samnite made peace. But this peace wouldn't last long because in 310 BCE, the two went to war again. But this also happens to coincide with the time that we get the very first mention of Pompeii. But after the Third Samnite War, Campania became part of the Roman Confederation, and its cities became allies of Rome. The Romans immediately fell in love with Pompeii and started to invest large sums of money for building projects. There was only one problem though. Let's say that Rome was like YouTube and Pompeii was like my Patreon, where you can get exclusive content. Rome and YouTube didn't want anybody to use another social platform other than for what they had. But Pompeii Patreon had an issue with this because they felt like Rome was stifling creativity and they wanted to take and make their own decisions. Now, is this all one big veiled attempt to get you to head over to my Patreon so you can help support the little guy? I don't know, I'll let you choose. Find out over on Patreon maybe. And this all led to the social war. It only lasted for a couple years, between 91 to 88 BCE. The war broke out when cities asked Roman YouTube to treat them fairly and give them citizenship. Pompeii eventually found themselves under siege by the Romans under a guy named Lucius Cornelius Sulla in 89 BCE. And when the social war was finally over, Rome declared everything south of the Po River to be Roman territory now. They gave everybody Roman citizenship, but Pompeii was treated a little less fairly than the others. Rome didn't like the role that Pompeii played, so they moved between 4,000 to 5,000 legionnaires into the city. And they also declared that Latin was now the official language of the city. This brought about an era of wealth and prosperity for Pompeii. New building projects were initiated. They built a new amphitheater and an Odeon. It was also during this time that Pompeii reached its height, and everything remained relatively calm until 59 CE, when a riot broke out at the amphitheater between the people of Pompeii and New Syria. The reason that the riot started has been lost to time, but we got some good guesses. It's thought that it probably started with an exchanging of words over the social war. It started off with people shouting, then throwing stones, and then drawing swords. When it was all done, Pompeii actually came out on top of this riot. But then in 62 CE, we see the first signs that Mount Vesuvius is going to erupt. A massive earthquake hit both Pompeii and Herculaneum, and the people of Pompeii probably thought this was the end. Houses and temples collapsed all over the place. Parts of the city wall collapsed. Fires raged across the city. The death toll was high, and the recovery process was hindered by the damage that was done to the bridge over the Sarnus River, and neither city had full chance to recover before the next events happened. At this point, many people chose to leave Pompeii, but some stayed. The people that stayed tried to repair what they could, and as fast as they could, because in 64 CE, Emperor Nero visited the city. And now we're coming up on the main event, but before we get to that, if you're anything like me, when you were younger, you probably wondered, why did the people of Pompeii choose to take and live near a volcano? And there's a couple reasons for this, but there's one one major advantage that we're going to get into in a second. But the first reason is they didn't know it was a volcano. They thought it was just a normal mountain. And that second reason is the advantage I was talking about. Volcanic soils are great for crops. After a volcano erupts, it leaves a layer of volcanic deposit. And when these deposits start to break down, they release things like magnesium and potassium. These two things act as a natural fertilizer for crops. This means that farmers have to do less work to produce crops. Alright, so back to the main event. After the earthquake of 62, the earthquakes never really stopped. But much like your partner snoring at night, you just become used to it. But by the summer of 79, they had to take notice. Because dead fish started to float in the Saranos River. Their springs and wells started to dry up, and plants on the side of the volcano started to wilt. And those earthquakes that they started to become accustomed to started to become more frequent, but they weren't any more violent. Pliny the Younger was present the day of the eruption, and wrote 2 letters to the historian Tacitus about his eyewitness account of the event. We as archaeologists have used these letters and archaeological digs to help fill in the blanks about the events of that day. The traditional date that Mount Vesuvius is said to have erupted was the 29th of August in 79 CE, but because the people of Pompeii loved to leave graffiti all over the city, there's a partial inscription that was left that has changed our thought about when the volcano actually erupted. The partial inscription was found in 2018 and suggests that the volcano erupted in mid-October, but it doesn't really matter what day the volcano erupted because we know the aftermath. We know that the morning of the eruption there was a deafening bang. This was the magma flowing to the surface and exploding through the crater of the volcano. At this point, smoke started to spew out of the top of the volcano, but the people of Pompeii still didn't take much heed of what was going on. But by midday they had to acknowledge there was something going on because the volcano finally erupted. The eruption started with the cone of the volcano being blasted off, sending pumice particles into the air some 43 kilometers high. And for reference, that's almost halfway to space. And the explosion from the volcano that day has calculated to be almost 100,000 times stronger than the bomb that the US dropped on Hiroshima. The ash from the volcano started to fall like a heavy snow, and within minutes, everything was covered with centimeters of ash. This caused a mass panic amongst the people of Pompeii. They started to flee, take shelter anywhere they could as the ash started to pile higher and higher. But for the people of Pompeii, their day was about to get much worse. That afternoon, there was another explosion from the volcano. This time ash shot into the sky 9.5 kilometers higher than it did that morning. The debris that fell this time was made of heavy stones, and between the ash that had been falling all day and this new heavier material, the buildings in Pompeii started to collapse underneath the weight. Those that hadn't managed to flee the city yet started to huddle anywhere they felt safe, along walls, underneath stairs, many people trying to escape with what prized possessions they had. And when things seemed like they couldn't get any worse, the volcano said, "Here, hold my lava." Because around 11 p.m. at night, the massive cloud that had been forming over top the volcano came crashing down in 6 waves of superheated air that asphyxiated anybody that was still in the city. And this air was so hot that it quite literally baked the people there. But what happened to the people that managed to escape the city? An archaeologist from Miami University of Ohio named Stephen Tuck spent many years of his career studying just this. But before he could answer that question, he had to know who lived in Pompeii. So he went about searching for family names in Pompeii. And when he found a family name in Pompeii, he would compare it to other areas where we know that people fled to, like Naples. And what he found was most people didn't choose to move to areas where they already had family. Instead, they chose to move to areas where they could either take a move up socially or make more money. An inscription in Naples actually references 2 well-known families from Pompeii, Tullius and Sabinus. Places like Pompeii and Herculaneum would be lost to time, but they wouldn't be forgotten. They would live on in stories and legends in the local area. Herculaneum was the first to be rediscovered in 1705, but it would have to wait for excavations until 1738. Pompeii wasn't rediscovered until 1755 when they were working on the Salerno Canal. These early excavations of the sites were carried out by people that were more or less looking to get rich, with no care for the site itself. It wasn't until the 1860s that we started to do organized digs of the site. It was under Italian archaeologist Giuseppe Ferrelli that these excavations actually started to take shape into what we know them today. The first thing that he did was the areas that had already been looted, he had them cleaned up and documented. From there, he divided Pompeii up into 9 regions, and he gave every door on a street a number. And you more than likely have seen photos of the bodies of the people that died that day. We actually have Ferrelli to thank for figuring out how to preserve these bodies. He would make casts of the bodies by pouring cement into the hollows. But don't worry, the bodies that were inside, much like you're wont to subscribe to my channel, had long since disintegrated. Excavations at the site continued until World War II when they were brought to a halt. They started back up in 1950, and by the 1990s, 2/3 of the city had been uncovered. Excavations are still ongoing at the site, and Pompeii still has many secrets left to reveal to us. I want to thank you all for watching, and I especially want to thank my patrons. They make all of this possible. If you would like to help support the channel, then head over to Patreon. For $2 a month, you can get exclusive content like my Too Hot for YouTube videos, where I cover the nastier and darker sides of history that YouTube won't allow on here.